I am joined by Jason Yang, aka Rada Storm, who is the Marvel Snap developer who led design on this current Young Avengers season of Marvel Snap. Jason, this was his first design lead role at Marvel Snap, but he has been working in the team for a while now. I believe he is a game developer, is the official title for what he does. He is someone who works with Glenn, and this was his first step into taking the reins of a whole season. And since we are in the middle of that season, I wanted to see if I could get him on here, sort of pick his brain, figure out what the process we went through to make these cards was, and how that ended up from concept getting into the game Marvel Snap. Because I don't think we've had a lot of deep dives on stuff like this before. Whenever we have Glenn on, it's usually like grilling him about why Loki is broken or whatever. It's a very different thing. This is about the specific season in which Jason was the design lead. So, with all of that said, Jason, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you. Nice to see all of you on the internet.
So I gave a very brief, abbreviated, and probably incorrect description of who you are and what you do. Would you care to correct the record? Let everyone know exactly what your role is at Second Dinner.
Sure. So I joined, it was like February around 2 years ago, before the game even launched, before the game was even announced, as an associate game designer at Second Dinner. And now I'm a game designer on Second Dinner on Marvel Snap. I joined initially just helping out with all the card implementation, getting stuff ready for the game to launch. And now over time, I've been learning from the amazing team that I get to work with and been going in on getting playtests up and running, gathering internal feedback, iterating on cards. Like you said, I work super closely with Glenn on all of the content, and it's a great time all around.
So one thing you said there was playtests. I know there's been some sort of, let's say, skepticism that anyone actually playtests anything inside of Second Dinner. Can you confirm, there's a theory going around that something changed at some point, like after Loki and Elsa, there were like more playtests? And there's also a theory going around, I mean, obviously that no one playtests anything. So can you confirm slash deny either of those things?
People play the game at Second Dinner.
Are you
You
sure?
can put that on record. I am pretty sure. I can give you at least 1% confidence
Okay.
on that. All
Okay.
right.
It's
We
just something.
have been evolving the process over time. We have been improving things over time. We've been adding people to the team. We've been growing our QA support and our design support. And over time, we've been trying out new things as well. We've been trying out new ways to gather feedback, new ways to run playtests, and also just new things to do during playtests. For example, one of the playtests we run is a focus card playtest where we have team members just pick a card and make a deck with the cards, see what they come up with. Whereas one of our other playtests, we just give them decks so that they can hop right into the game, get in the game, and see how the cards work as like quote unquote intended with like as if they had a smart deck.
So, as the person who's like coordinating playtests, what was it like to, I guess, get the feedback that you had on designs that you made? Was there anything, before we jump into the specifics, was there anything like you had a design that you were just like, I love this, and then it ended up not really making it into like functional implementation?
Yeah, there wasn't a great one on this season, but I can talk about a previous one that I had submitted for Hercules.
Hmm.
I believe the design was somewhere around the lines of he throws the top card of your deck over to your opponent's side and swaps its power to negative power. That was super sweet. People loved it. It did some wild and frankly insane things to the game, but the problem there was that it just was not able to be balanced. There were too many variables, too high variance. The difference between throwing like I don't know a Jeff versus the Destroyer was just nuts, and there wasn't a great way to balance around that and fix it to where we could still retain that excitement of some super swingy play, some super awesome thing that Hercules is doing from a fantasy perspective, and keep it balanced to where it would not break the game.
Yeah, throwing the destroyer does seem totally broken. Hey, you get minus 16 power and also your board blows up. Have fun. Yeah,
Good luck.
that I remember back in the beta there were combos where people were trying to, like, you'd have a Viper on the board and you'd have a destroyer on the board, and then what
Yep.
you'd do is you'd Odin the Viper to send over the destroyer, and then the Destroyer's on reveal would be triggered by the Odin. I would imagine that it is much better to do that A for free and B with minus 16 power instead of
A
16
little
power.
bit.
A little bit better.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So let's move on to the first of the cards that you led design for this season. We're going to start with Kate Bishop. What was this card's original concept? And keep in mind, I'm becoming a comics fan now. I read the Matt Fraction Hawkeye, I read West Coast Avengers. I'm actually a fan of Kate Bishop now. Was she always like this? Was it always just like she's going to do the arrow thing? Or were there ever other concepts for this card?
Yeah, from the start, she was firing arrows. She was doing cool things with arrows, and kind of inspired by Nico, actually, which I also worked on. Having more effects and having more cards makes cards more appealing, as it turns out. And so I actually have some notes on my side. One of the first versions of the card was actually a 4/6 that fired an arrow at each other location. Just a random arrow,
Ooh.
making it on the board. You didn't get to pick what it was, and I don't remember how many arrows it was back then, but we had one, two, three, 8 arrows in the hopper. Just going through them, we had the acid arrow, we had a data arrow, a net arrow. All of these were just inspired by the Hawkeye show. Just
Mm.
taking all of the trick arrows from that show, giving Kate some really awesome tricks that she could do, and really exploring the fantasy of using these really awesome arrows to do cool things.
So, one thing that really struck me after reading the Matt Fraction Hawkeye run, which I believe the show was like very much based on, was there was this scene where they were in a car and and the Clint Barton Hawkeye kept asking her for different arrows and she wasn't able to
Yeah.
find the exact arrows. Was the inspiration for randomly generating the arrows being like just fumbling around for something really quick and having to make do with what you had, or was that just sort of a like an accidental flavor win?
Oh yeah, 100%. It was just she didn't really understand what the arrows do. You can get them in game, figure out what to do with them, and then react to them in game. One of the reasons that we pivoted from that actually was because reacting to the arrows was not actually proving to be that fun, that exciting. It proved to be frustrating in some senses because sometimes you get like, for example, the current acid arrow
Yeah.
gets shot to a 4 card location. And so we just ended up pivoting to a way where you could use the arrows, you could shoot them intentionally, and actually be able to use them strategically. And that just turned out to be much more fun. You could double it up with stuff like Odin, or sorry, not Odin, but you get the point. On reveal doublers,
Yes.
and just get more arrows and just keep firing them off and actually be able to use them strategically instead of sometimes getting screwed over by them.
So with Kate specifically, I probably won't ask this question about any of the other cards, but like I will ask it about Kate because
Yeah.
is there any concern that this is just like so good at what she does that it has issues where like if you're looking to play this 3 drop in a deck, if you're looking to play any 2 drop in a deck, it becomes Kate. Like the cards she being so generally relevant. Is there a concern where like, you could run into the Jeff problem where it's just like this is an extremely good 2/3, or is it the other way around where you're like I'm very happy we finally made a card that competes with Jeff?
Yeah, I would say we tend to think about it in the latter. We don't really have a great way to nerf Jeff that
Mhm.
is still keeping him viable, still keeping the spirit of the card. Anything that goes from like 2/3 to 2/2 just kind of kills the card. And so people love the card, we'll just let him keep going. It's a cute card. People love the character. And so we thought, hey, maybe there's a way that we can just make a side grade to Jeff, make a card that competes in that same space. And it's also super exciting, and you can run in some different decks. And so Kate Bishop, 2/3, and it just kind of works out because the card kind of wants to be at 2 cost, kind of wants to be in that space to fill the curve and allow you to play out those arrows for super high value.
Next up is Marvel Boy, a card a ton of people really freaked out about. They looked at this card and they were like, the numbers on this card are so big. And I agree that the numbers on this card are enormous. However, is there something to the idea, especially post Gilgamesh, that if you're gonna make a zoo card, it just has to be really strong? We saw Gilgamesh get 2 additional power in order to make Zoo into a deck that really existed. Is there something to the idea of like this card being fairly limited in scope, meaning that it has to be stronger because the scope that it is limited to is so easily dealt with as either a pure points deck that needs to run Kyera to protect itself, or a deck that gets killmongered but is able to run like a Shadow King or something. But you don't even really want a Shadow King with this guy because obvious reasons.
Yeah, from the very start, Marvel Boy was focused around how can we help out one cost cards. When this card was first introduced and first being worked on, the current version of Gilgamesh was not actually set yet. We had a pretty different version of Gilgamesh. Zoo looked pretty different back then, and we wanted to see how we could help that deck out a bit. One of the really key inspirations for this version of the card was actually how can I make Squirrel Girl work really well and be playable? Back then, Squirrel Girl was like played in no decks whatsoever, super unviable, even though the squirrels were part of a lot of our marketing material. And it's pretty funny to win against your opponent with a army of squirrels. And so being able to buff multiple one cost cards and rewarding you for getting those one cost cards out early really ended up being a really great part of Marvel Boy and allowing that deck to shine. One of the other things that inspired this card was Kate Bishop throwing out a bunch of one cost cards. You'll see throughout, as we talk about more of the cards here, that synergy between the Young Avengers was a really key part of how I thought about the season and the design of these cards. I really wanted them to feel like a team and work well together. And so I think putting this card as a really great synergy piece in Zoo was a really great direction and ended up getting it in a pretty exciting place.
Speaking of the synergy between Young Avengers cards, I think there are two things that I want to hit with Wiccan. The first is you designed Marvel Boy to synergize with Squirrel Girl, a card that is mildly unplayable before. And you've designed clearly, I think, Wiccan and Speed to work with Quicksilver and Domino, other like vaguely unplayable cards. But what's interesting to me is that since Wiccan has been out, the number one card I've been playing with him is actually Kate Bishop. And because of the way she fills up the curve, like his best friends are like Maria Hill, Kate Bishop, Kitty Pride, rather than Quicksilver Domino. When something like that happens, I mean, I guess first of all, the question is, was this intended to be a Quicksilver Domino card? And was the synergy with Kate Bishop built in there? And then, are you unhappy if something else ends up being what the best thing to do with this card is when it was intended to be thing A? How do you approach that as a designer if you intended it in a certain way and it was taken in a completely different way?
All of that was certainly intended. Looking at Quicksilver and Domino, it was in a pretty similar boat as Squirrel Girl. We wanted to release old cards essentially alongside the new cards, that there's more content coming out and more new things that people are seeing in game. Specifically with Wiccan and Speed, there's a pretty strong thematic tie to Quicksilver as well as their uncle.
Yep.
It's all family, and so making the effects work well together, I think, was a really strong fantasy to put out and make the decks really feel cohesive. Absolutely, totally fine that it did not work out as well in live, and we kind of expected that it would not necessarily be the best deck, but it would certainly be something that people would try. I think that part of the beauty of running a live game with so many players is that people are going to figure out things that you would never in a million years figure out in your internal playtest just by sheer force of chaos and
Yeah.
big numbers and numbers of games. People are going to try crazy stuff. People are going to make crazy stuff. And it's awesome to see what you made inspire so many people to make awesome stuff based off of it.
So, timeline question here. You said you were concepting this stuff in January, right? Right when Kyera was about to come out. When you're concepting stuff, is there a sort of cognizance of the cards that are going to come out after? Like Gilgamesh, you said was very different. Did that cause you to change Marvel Boy in any way? Were there any cards that caused you to change Wiccan in any way? What was the process of this card's development like?
Yeah, so these cards were actually, I believe the first version of them came out back in even earlier, October. Marvel Boy was
Whoa.
just one of the last characters to get locked in. We were going between him and another character that I won't name because we might
Sure.
do him again in the future. But yeah, the initial versions of these cards were super, super old, way back in October. And there are situations where things come out and they change the way that we look at these old cards. We have the ability to change the cards before they release. We totally go back and rethink about them, test them with new cards. In many of our new card decks, we make a concerted effort to try and include some of these cards that release along the way to that card, just that we make sure that we don't forget to test them together, because it can be kind of easy to forget about them when we see all this stuff on live. We have to think about live balance as well, making all the OTAs. And all these cards are kind of like put in a box, done with until we release them. Nothing in particular stood out for me about Wiccan, but one thing that I can actually say is in the development of Hydra Bob, a diner was not actually a thing. So we didn't think about the diner interaction until pretty late when diner had auto snap implemented, and we did need to go back and make an update to Hydra Bob to make sure that that didn't go absolutely insane and really confusing to players.
That's actually kind of interesting in terms of like other game modes. I hadn't actually considered that. I have a Wiccan question though. Was his
Yeah.
payoff always energy? Was there ever a consideration for him to be something other than a ramp card? Because there's a little bit of a contradiction between Wiccan and Speed, where Speed wants you to play something. They both want you to curve out, but then one of you makes it a little bit harder to curve out because Wiccan gives you extra energy. Was there ever a consideration of other payoff? And why is it feels to me like Second Dinner, basically since Hope Summers, has been much more willing to play around in the extra energy space between Hope Summers and Arishem and Wiccan. There's been more stuff in that space. Is that something that's been apparent to you, or is that just me gaslighting myself?
Yeah, I think it's more of a thing where we were very cautious of it early on because of how powerful it is, because of how warping it can be to the game. And I think you can see back in the day we had Electro as one of our main
Yeah.
energy granter cards, and that card is a lot more restrictive than some of these cards. Wiccan's payoff has pretty much always been energy. Uh, as one of the cycles of playtesting, we thought about other ways that we could pay off for Wiccan. We thought about other things we could give for the card, but the most satisfying things for Wiccan were always having that persistent payoff for having to base your early game around the card, having to base not only your plays, but also your deck building to make sure you have a critical mass of things to fill out that early curve, to fill out your early plays and enable that. And so having energy provides us that persistent reward that people can really be excited about and see that big number on the bottom of their screen that's really hard to get anywhere else. On Wiccan and Speed, I think that Speed has always occupied this space as a really solid 3-drop in that curve right going up into Wiccan. It hasn't really come up to be a problem because Speed can go in other decks as like a Spectrum, and I'm sure we'll go into that in a little
Mm.
bit. But while it is a little bit of anti-synergy there, I don't consider that a major problem because I don't think the decks have to be entirely tied to each other. I think that if the cards can be played in different ways and in different decks, then it just helps each card stand on its own as an exciting content piece on their own.
So let's talk about Speed. I feel like I don't know how much you guys track community perception, and frankly, you don't have to tell me, but I feel like this is the card that the community as a whole is the lowest on. As we're recording this, it has not released. I believe it will release by the time we are recording it. And by the time it is out. And this is a card to me that it's like, I get why they think it looks bad, but also this is like a 3-7 to a 3-9 in your average game. Like, you're not really skipping more than 2 turns of floating energy in your average game. This is a 3-7 basically all of the time, and a little bit bigger than that if you're actually building it right. Is there some concern that, like, this is a card that looks unappealing but is strong? And is there, like, a concerted effort to release, cards that look appealing when they are strong? Like, is that something that you think about, like how a card will be appealing versus its actual power level? Do people buy cards because they're strong, or do people buy cards because they're good?
Yeah, so Speed's one of those cards that is pretty numbers based and
Hmm.
is pretty based on how much power he can get and not really too much else. I think it's important for us to be able to release those cards and slot them in places where they can fit into other archetypes and support those archetypes. But it is, like you said, a little bit more difficult to make them appealing because they don't have that really high aspirational goal of, oh, I'm going to get +2 energy for the rest of the game. I'm
Yeah.
going to get these awesome arrow cards to do really cool and unique things. There really isn't too much of that. So with Speed, one of the things that we tried to do is actually bake in some more synergy hooks into the card, like the ongoing effect, like the move to 3 cost for this card. Initially, this card was actually a 2 cost on reveal that gave you power to the card if you had spent all of your energy before you played the card. Back then, we actually didn't think about the domino and quicksilver thing, and so this was meant to fit into that lower curve, maybe fit into some on reveal synergies. But over time, as we develop the card along with Wiccan and the rest of the season, we try to add more synergy hooks there and hook it into the curve that we had discovered Wiccan would probably fit into. And we basically did all those to hopefully make the card as appealing as possible. But the other nice thing about these numbers-based cards is that they're much easier to adjust and get into the right place via OTA. We don't need to go back and do functional adjustments. We don't need to go back and do text adjustments. Most of the time for these cards, it's just a few numbers away. And we have the ability to come back and revise the game. That's part of what makes the OTA system so great for us.
Yeah, I actually, do you mind if I ask about that?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people have built themselves up into a position where the only possible option for you guys is to release the card perfectly balanced, exactly strong enough without being broken the first time. Because if you don't fix it immediately, a la Hydra Bob, then it's not in the caches anymore. But if you do fix it immediately, a la Hydra Bob, then you let people know too late and they weren't able to get it and then they were sad about it. Do you feel that the OTA system, like, to me it reads as something that is like objectively great for the balance of the game, but there's this economic tie-in that you have to consider whenever something like that comes up. Like, I can't tell whether the community would rather, let's say, you buff I don't know, US agent when it's not in caches, or whether they'd rather just literally wait and sit there for the next time US agent comes into caches and that's when the buff is supposed to be. Is there consideration to that, or are you guys just like, people paid for this card, it kind of sucks, we should buff it?
So I don't think our system is perfect, and I don't think that it's gonna be realistic for us to make perfectly balanced cards every single time. We're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna miss some things. We're gonna, like I said with Wiccan, not catch some things that the community catches on to and makes super awesome decks around. I think that the most important thing that we can do is be reactive and be on the pulse of how the game is running and how the balance of the game is running over time. That's part of what we try to do to make ourselves a really awesome live operated game that can stand the test of time and keep evolving and putting out new content and supporting new decks. Our general philosophy around the release of Series 5 cards and their balance is that if we can put them into a better state via OTA, we're going to do so. I think that it's important for us to do right by the players who have supported us by collecting the cards, obtaining the cards, and I think that it's really important that we make the cards that we make really awesome and exciting to play with. And so we're going to keep trying to balance them live. We're going to keep trying to make them exciting to play with. And I know that it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes if you're like, hey, I didn't get US Agent because he felt really weak and suddenly he's really strong. I wish I got him. But on the flip side, I think it's also really frustrating if you're like, hey, I really love US Agent. I think that is a really cool card. And Economy is super weak. We want to make sure that people feel excited about cards, and when they do really like a card or a character, they can feel like, hey, I'm going to get this card and I can believe that this card will someday get updated and put into a good spot.
See, that's actually just like fascinating to me because for the longest time, like, I am the spikiest of spikes, right? Like, I didn't have characters I liked. That wasn't like a thing. I wasn't a comics reader. This game has gotten me into comics, and now I have characters I like, and now I get it. Like, I'm like, wait, I actually do want Kate Bishop to be good. I actually do like Gwenpool. I actually am kind of mad that the Hulk is the vanilla six. I read Immortal Hulk. It was really good. Like, I would like to play that, right?
Yeah,
So I think that is probably like, I think that is a good thing to do generally. This is coming from someone who did not get it at all previously because I was only focused on card
totally.
power, but now it's like, yeah, people really care about these characters in a way. And so I think that that's probably, in as much as there are any good choices in the system that you're in, this is the one that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah, I think you're really representative of a player that plays the game for the gameplay
Yeah.
and is really focused on the high balance and high level competition of the game, which is great. We love to have you guys. We're really excited about all the awesome stuff that you guys come up with and all the cool things that you do with your decks and the ways that you play the game. There's another really important class of players that we also really want to make sure that we do right by, which are coming in because they really love Marvel. They've
Mhm.
seen the shows, they've read the comics, and they just really want to play a game with Marvel characters so that they can play their favorite characters and just do cool stuff with them. And I think that it's really important for us to make the cool characters feel awesome to play with. And that's why, for example, we go back and try to make Captain America feel cool. We go back and try to make some of these other cards that aren't doing great feel cool, because some people are going to love these characters. They're going to come by and try to play with these characters. And we want to make that experience feel awesome.
Final card release for the season, Emperor Hulkling. Was this card always this? Because this is a sort of a way of expressing both the name Hulkling, meaning like big power in Marvel Snap. That's kind of what it's code for, and the fact that he is actually, I believe, a Skrull, a
Yes.
shapeshifter. And so this is an example of being a shapeshifter while also maintaining the keyword really, really, really big. How did you arrive at this as the implementation of those concepts?
Yeah, Hulk in our game has always been pretty synonymous with massive card, massive power, massive cost.
Mhm.
I think that even though you can argue that Hulkling is at his core a scroll and a shapeshifter, even just the presence of Hulk in his name makes it really important for us to focus on that Hulk fantasy and incorporate it in some way. I think he's always been copying 6 cost cards abilities, and we've done that in a few different iterations over time. But we actually did start him at a 5 cost to try and put him a little bit lower in the curve and give him a little bit more stuff to do. But one of the things that helped inspire him to go up to 6 cost and get up to above 10 power was not only just a Hulk fantasy, but also trying to make him feel good in conjunction with Wiccan, who was giving you more energy, allowing you to play those 6 cost cards earlier. And so making all of the Young Avengers work together in that sense really felt like an important thing to do. And I think that in our playtesting, it's proven to be pretty solid. The interesting thing about Hulkling is that the randomness of the ability is a little bit difficult to evaluate without
Yeah.
actually knowing the numbers of what things will do, what are the chances that you get this effect versus the other effect. Some games will be really awesome as you like get like a really stupid Galactus game and lock your opponent out, but other games are just gonna get something really terrible and kind of wish that you had Magneto or something.
Mhm.
And so I think the thing that we identified about this card was the fun of discovering what the Hulkling will be, discovering what new ability you'll play with this game, and again, sort of like Speed, we have some numbers hooks here to
Yeah.
really adjust Hulkling wherever we need him to be. And so I'm hoping that people are going to be just as excited as we were to try those awesome random effects and see what happens. Roll the dice.
I feel like there's a certain subset of my audience who, when they hear stuff like awesome random effects, is just like, god, casuals. But do think there's like an aspect of Hulkling that is really worth pointing out, which is your opponent will never be able to play around this card. They will
Yeah,
never be able to play around this card. If you are snapping like a Hulkling Arnim Zola, they are not going to know that's what you're doing. That's
oh yeah,
incredibly valuable, as Arishem has shown. Obviously, Arishem's better, probably. 1 extra energy. Very, very good. But Hulkling is like a really interesting test for me, because a lot of people complain about the randomness of Arishem making it hard to play around stuff. And I think fundamentally, that does matter, but what really matters is the energy. I'm interested to know if that randomness alone is enough to carry a card. Because Hulkling has
yeah,
stats that are below vanilla. And I'm pretty sure if it has
yes.
stats that were above vanilla, the randomness would be enough to carry it. But I want to know how strong that randomness is straight up. Do you have any previews for me? Do you think it's going to be strong? Let me know.
I think it's a little bit difficult to gauge because it is random
Sure.
and it's going to take some time to actually just like law of big numbers, average out, and see where the card will actually land. One of the important things we came to in the development of this card actually was trying to balance between input and output randomness. And what that means is trying to balance around, for example, Kate Bishop.
Yeah.
She was initially based around firing the arrows at first, and you have to deal with that random effect after. Now she's giving you the chance to decide what random effect you use, and maybe you just don't even want to play an arrow. That's totally fine. At one point, Hulkling had, I believe, on reveal to copy the card, and that was just a lot less satisfying than the current version of showing you in hand what he copied. So you can choose not to use the effect if it turns out to be a destroyer, or be able to conscientiously Arnim Zola something. It's not just random. You don't have to roll the dice to actually come to that effect. I think that that was really important in helping the card feel satisfying to play with and mitigating some of the bad cases of what you could copy.
Yeah, it makes it a card you can plan around that your opponent explicitly cannot. And that
Yes.
delta is really interesting to me. I want to know how many points of power that's worth. And I think Hulkling is going to sort of help us figure that out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
So when Jason proposed this topic, he had to explain it to me a little bit. I didn't know what he was talking about, but once he explained it to me, I was overjoyed. Here's a fun fact for all of our viewers. Did you know that all the playtest cards on their live server or whatever server they have is MS Paint? They just like draw a picture in Microsoft Paint and that's the art of the cards because it takes a while for them to like actually get art. So what we were going to do here is we're just going to talk about how that happened, and during the course of talking about it, just going to show some of those cards on the screen right there. So you'll be able to see some of the MS Paint art superimposed over us for, I think it's like some Kate Bishop arrows, some other things. That's actually what people are playtesting with when they are testing these cards. They are playing those MS Paint versions. How did this start? Was this like a Ben Brode thing? What happened here?
I think it was a me thing, and it's been so long that it's a little bit difficult to remember. But I think I was the one who started it and started getting us to do it. I was kind of inspired by, I don't know if any of you guys are going to remember Artifact, the Dota card game from way back when. They posted some of their actual playtest art cards,
Sure.
and I think they were like showing some of them in a playtest. And I thought that, hey, that's a really charming thing for us to have, and it just sounds like a really fun thing to do for the team. It's really important when we playtest that players are able to recognize what the card is and sort of see at a glance what they're playing with and understand that ability. It's really difficult if we just have a blank card for you to really get that understanding of an ability, start having that, see the card, know what it does, be able to play with it. It makes the playtest a lot clunkier. It makes our player experience a lot clunkier in playtest. So having that art to at least give some sort of tie between what the character is and what it does really helps our playtest process. Of course, it's a little bit time consuming, so we don't always do it. We're not always on top of it. But I think that when we do it, players really love it in our internal playtest. And I think it's a really charming thing that gets players to really be excited for the playtest and be excited to see all the new stuff in the game. Just kind of like how you guys see the new art and the new cards in the game as well.
Is there ever any chance of us getting these on the live? Can I get like a Kate Bishop MS Paint variant? Like what there's cards in Magic. I know famously one of the unsets had "Look at me, I'm the DCI," or was drawn by Mark Rosewater, the Magic guy. Like
I'd say it's unlikely at the moment, but we'll see. We'll see. If enough people want it, then maybe.
I want that so bad. I want it out like explicitly on annoying cards. I want to play MS Paint Green Goblin and Hobgoblin. I want to play MS Paint Acid Arrow. Those are the cards I want to be like MS Paint. I want it to be like a gag. That's what I want. I would like to play MS Paint Hobgoblin.
I will say it'd be funny as April Fools, but stay tuned. I can't say for
Would
sure.
be.
Unlikely at the moment, but we'll see.
So, to wrap up, let's talk lessons. One of the things that I learned through the overview of the cards you gave was that you focused on what felt like two things to me in this season that I don't think necessarily get focused on all of the time in other seasons. One of them was we want these cards to work well together. And the other one was we want some of these cards to provide boosts to older archetypes or to bad cards in the game currently. Is that something that was unique to this season, or something that like was your unique design sensibility? Or is that something that is a constant overarching goal that you just decided you wanted to intensify for this one?
Yeah, I would totally not say that it is unique to this season. I think that we have a number of levers and inspirations that we can draw from when we create new cards, and that's just kind of what I chose to go off of when I started designing this season. For example, Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight were
Right.
designed to work together as discard cards, but we don't do that all too often because our model of releasing cards one by one makes it a little bit difficult to say, for example, in Magic, you can open a pack and just get two mice, and they work together because they have the same mechanic. It's a lot more difficult to do that in our game, but I think that it's still really important for us to provide cards that work well together and have that thematic tie between a team to really feel like you're playing the Young Avengers or you're playing the Avengers.
So you talked about the thematic tie with the Young Avengers. There's some thematic ties between the Avengers, but many of the Avengers are stuck in Series 1. Is there some consideration internally towards like, because I know this has been litigated many times, right? Like I've seen all the Glenn Jones responses where they're like, look, we need recognizable cards in Series 1. I think of the Avengers, the only one that sees like real consistent play is Iron Man, right? Who is just good the whole game, basically. But like, is there some consideration for like, oh, maybe Captain America shouldn't be Captain America. He should have Blue Marvel's effect or whatever. Is there consideration for stuff like that, or maybe Patriots effect or things of that nature? Or is it just like we like these guys being what they are in the early game? We think that's good. And are there like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, are there plans to make some of like maybe change the balance a little bit of these fan favorites early? Or is it just they are fulfilling an incredibly valuable role? Because I know when I played Marvel Snap for the first time, a lot of the best experiences I had were in that pool 1, pool 2 area. It's like the best, like the new player experience is actually probably the best part of this game. And I think they are a major part of that.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a balancing act that we have to strike here between both making the cards work well together and individually, and also providing new players who are coming into this game because they love Marvel some of those really awesome and notable characters for them to immediately get and feel really excited about. I think one of the biggest examples of us changing a old card to be a lot more exciting within that card's fantasy was Spider-Man.
Yeah.
We felt that one of the most popular, if not the most popular Marvel
Mm-hmm.
characters should be a card that we would be happy to be played a lot more often as opposed to the previous version that was locking people out. Even though it was a reasonable thematic element, we just really wanted the card to be playable. We really wanted to push that card out and have people be excited about it and also work well with the move cards that we see in so many other spiders nowadays.
So, in terms of this season, did you feel like you took anything away from it so far? We're a little over halfway through it right now. Have you learned anything from the reception, or is that kind of a more, we're going to wait a month after the season, do a retrospective kind of deal? Do you feel like the way players are taking these cards has taught you anything that you're going to take into future seasons that you lead design on?
Yeah, part of the difficulty in my answer here is combining what we see on live, trying to get a sense of that without being too knee jerk on reactions. Like, for
Sure.
example, if we were too knee jerk on reactions, we'd just be buffing things left and right and not actually letting them have some time to sit and play and really develop their decks. I mean, sometimes even with all the players that we have playing the games, it takes a while for decks to develop. I think it was really awesome to see that cards play together well and fit together with their team. And I think that players have been enjoying uh being able to play these cards together. And I think that it's the direction that we can explore going into the future. It's a thing that we can keep hooking into. And yeah, that's all I can really say for now.
All right. Jason, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any final messages to the people that you would like to get out there? Or you can just disappear magically.
I mean, I do this because I love making awesome stuff for people to enjoy, and it really makes me feel great when people are having fun with the stuff that I make and it brings joy to their lives. I think one of the things that made me the most happy to do what I do was hearing when Hank Green had cancer and really
Mm.
played our game and got through it with the help of all the fun that he had playing our game. So, thank you all for playing. Really happy that you are all having fun with the game, or at least I hope you are. You can play on Twitter, I guess, if you're not. But
Oh yeah, that'll
keep
that'll.
snapping and enjoy the game. Thank you so much for playing.
Shout out to Hank Green, pissing out
Shout out
cancer.
to Hank Green.
Shout special on Dropout now. Shout out to Dropout.
Shout out to Dropout.